Hello? Hello? Is this thing on? Hello, listeners. This is D.T. Risden coming to you from beyond the void. I hope I'm coming through all right. I seem to have found myself a long way from home. If you're here and listening, I'd like to share some of the stories I've uncovered with you. Some you may find funny, unsettling, or downright terrifying. So before my signal dies, let's get into it, shall we? Today's story is about a woman who loves to garden. Her life was simple enough until the ravens decided that she could use a little more excitement in her life. The veil between life and death is always perilously thin, worn through, as it were, in places, and sometimes even nature's little beasties are the stewards who bring that to light. This is Trinkets. Addie bent down and picked up the glistening trinket. It was about 2 inches long and flared at the ends. She turned it over in her hands as a bright eye watched her from the peak of the roof. It twitched unnaturally. She stood transfixed and was abruptly reminded she was being rude. "Caw, caw, caw!" blatted the indignant raven from the rooftop. "Sorry, it's beautiful, thank you," she said genuinely to the iridescently black imp. She turned the object over in her hand again. It was brittle and almost weightless. She looked up to the impatient gift-giver again. "What is it?" she asked, holding it where the bird could see. But the raven just blinked and twitched, then spurred itself to flight back toward the woodline and its companions, complaining earnestly about her lack of manners the whole way. Addie slipped the small white token into her pocket and went back to watering the garden. She'd have to return the favor with trinkets of her own. The ravens seemed to enjoy their barter exchange, and she did too. They brought all sorts of things: buttons, pebbles, bottle caps, little pieces of colored glass, but she'd never seen anything like this. She kept a little wooden tray on the potting bench to put their special commodities in. She also left some fatty scraps, a handful of unshelled peanuts, and occasionally some cat food for them too. Her offerings included beads, pennies, and other assorted shiny things. This was a tradition that had kept her entertained for years. She loved her little goth garden and its woven wattle fence, meager potting bench, black and purple irises, hollyhocks, and coleus. Feeding the birds and other wildlife, tending the plants, and just spending time outside in her little fenced paradise brought her peace, until the ravens decided that she needed more excitement in her life. One rainy afternoon, a few days later, one of their ilk, soaked and looking quite disheveled, started pecking at the window of her living room. Concerned, she walked to the window, fine rivulets of rain streaming down the glass, to see if the bird was injured. She never saw them when it was raining, nor did they make a habit of pecking on her windows. As she approached, she saw something white in the dripping beak of her visitor. When it noticed it had gotten her attention, it dropped its gift on the window ledge and awkwardly departed, soaked and quite pitiful looking. She peered through the window but couldn't make out what was on the ledge. She hastily grabbed a jacket, pulled the collar tight around her neck, and walked around the house to the living room window, trying to stay under the eave and out of the downpour. She grabbed the little white object and hurried back inside. Once she'd closed the door and deposited the jacket on the back of a chair to dry, she looked at the tiny offering. It looked much the same as the first: small, white, flared on the ends. She compared it to the first trinket, and it looked very similar, but smaller. She wondered why on earth one of them had braved the weather to deliver it, and Wyatt wanted to be sure it got her attention. Strange, she thought. They'd never left gifts quite like this before. Over the next few weeks, they brought more of the little white curios interspersed with their regular wares. Some were long, some were more rock or pebble-like. Some even had long, thin lines embedded in them, as if slightly gnawed by field mice or squirrels. She placed them in the box she kept all of their little gifts in throughout the years. It was just a little shoebox that she used that sat uncovered in the bay window. As she walked to and fro in the house, she liked to look at all the little treasures they had brought her. Some glinted in the light from the window. The gifts made her happy, until one day they did not. The day started like any other. Water the garden, fill the feeders and the trinket box, clean up the breakfast dishes. As she went to water her houseplants in the bay window, she was suddenly startled by another urgent series of pecks at the window. So startled, she accidentally bumped the little shoebox and knocked it onto the floor. She looked down, and among the colored glass and bottle caps were the little white things. But this time, instead of seeing them singly, she saw them as a pattern. The long white shapes, all varying lengths, and the rock round ones, suddenly snapped into focus. They were bones. Human bones. The bones of a human hand. She looked up, startled by another flurry of frantic pecking at the window. It was another raven with another bone gift. Forgetting the now forensic mess on the floor, she ran out the door and grabbed the most recent little bone left on the windowsill. She held it, heart pounding, and looked around for its small black courier. As she walked into the yard, scanning the garden and the trees, she heard a flat "caw" come from behind her. Sitting perched on the pinnacle of the roof was the delivery raven, blinking and twitching in the early morning light. Feathers edged in unnatural blues, greens, and purples. "Where did you get this?" she asked apprehensively, her voice wavering. "Ha!" was the sharp, flat reply. Show me where you got this," she demanded, holding the small bone aloft where it could see. The raven blinked, twitched, and fluffed out its feathers as if considering, though inconvenienced by the request. "Caw, caw, caw!" it answered bitterly, then leapt up abruptly and effortlessly took flight toward the woodline. Addie had no way of knowing if it understood her or not, but there was only one way to find out. She bolted out the garden gate, forgetting in her haste to even latch it back. She had to jog to keep up with the soaring felon, but she managed to keep it in sight. As she approached the woodline of tall pines, oaks, and maples, she thought she had lost sight of the little gravedigger. Then came the loud caw, and she saw it hopping from tree limb to tree limb, waiting impatiently. "Go on," she said, "I'm coming." "Caw, caw," came the less than tolerant answer, and off it tipped through the canopy. The ground here was soft and loamy, though thankfully little underbrush. She had to watch her step as well as her diminutive usher. If she twisted her ankle out here, there's no telling what would happen to her. As of yet, she had not contemplated the actual scenario that led her feathery monger to have access to human bones. Deeper and deeper into the woods it led her. Even though it was midday, the woods were already darkening, thickening, and closing in. The air started to feel heavy, and the odor started to change, from fresh pine needles, green wood and bark, to something ominous. A cloyingly sweet smell gently met her nostrils in waves. Her winged companion continued to hop stiffly through the treetops, occasionally urging her to hurry with a ministerial caw. She stopped momentarily to wrangle something obtrusive out of her shoe and catch her breath. When she scanned the canopy to find her foe, she saw it suddenly descend to the ground about 20 feet ahead of her, spread its wings, and rudely bark, "Haw!" like This is what you wanted. We're here. Now what? She walked to where it had landed, and it hopped back cautiously, twitching and blinking. On the ground, she saw several long sticks at odd angles, along with several smaller ones. She bent and looked closer. The sticks were all too white, all too smooth. They were not sticks at all. They were bones. Bones that made up most of what used to be a human arm. At the end of the arm were a few small remaining finger and wrist bones, glinting in a dappled puddle of light. A feminine wristwatch woven haphazardly in between. She looked at it for a long time, trying to process what she was seeing. The raven observed with its fiery eyes. Twitch. She looked around her. There was a human jaw not far from where she stood, with moss and tiny mushrooms growing decidedly around it. She saw what looked like yellow hair not far from that. She looked around and saw what looked like piles of clothes laid out in a dozen places all over the ground. Socks, jeans, a yellow tennis shoe, half of a bruised purple bra. Twitch. The more she looked, the more she seemed surrounded. She looked behind her the way she had come in and saw shallow depressions in the ground under the pines. There was 1, 2, 3, 4. The more she looked, the more there were. The conflagrated eyes of the gravekeeper looked on. Some were pocked with stunted grass, others with fresh dirt starting to settle, even more with clothing peeking through in the motley shadows under the tall, unconcerned trees. The breeze shifted slightly. Twitch. She finally came to her senses enough to notice the smell. It was rot and decay mixed with a wet moldering of old fabrics. It was rich and heavy and overwhelming. Her stomach began to roll. Everything seemed to get suddenly brighter and stretch out infinitely before her. The graves elongated, the bones lengthened, the trees flowed up to meet the sky. She started shaking and stumbled backwards, struck with a sudden urge to just get home. Twitch. Suddenly, she could hear the highway, truck brakes, engines roaring, traffic all too loud, all too noticeable, all too real. She looked behind her heel to see what she had stumbled over, and it was round and white and did a half roll before it stopped. It was a half-decomposed human skull, a rat's nest of brunette hair, no lower jaw, eye sockets empty. Half of the forehead and face was a glowing, radiant white. She looked up, drew in a breath, saw a squirrel running up a tree trunk with something white in its mouth. The raven alighted on her shoulder, eyes blazing, countenance resolute, and she started to scream. And the bedlam of a conspiracy of ravens screamed with her. Poor Addie. I hope at least she found her way back home. Perhaps her new friends would lend a hand, or a wing. The signal from the void is getting weak, so I best sign off before the shadows start to lengthen. I hope this reached someone, and that maybe in connection I can find my own way out. This is Drew Terrifier Risden, signing off from the abyss.